Per tant, gràcies als companys de la Demarcació de Lleida del Col·legi de Periodistes de Catalunya per convidar-me a presidir aquesta taula, que és l'última, però estic segur que la més interessant, o de les més interessants que hi ha hagut fins ara. Jo parlaré en anglès breument, us presento el personatge i si us sembla entrem en matèria, tenim uns 40-45 minuts, d'acord? So, Mr. Tilić, thanks for being here in Lleida and welcome. Mr. Tilić is a well-known journalist. He's a Turkish journalist from 1987. He's working non-stop. And then he is also a lecturer, professor in the university and in various universities of Turkey. He is also reporting from, many countries, from Afghanistan to Iraq, and also from Turkey, of course, every day. And he is a kind of activist also for the freedom of speech in his country. So he's the person to be here this evening because we are just, debating about the question of freedom of press. And if there is a country right now very affected for this question in Europe, this is Turkey. And is a kind of precursor, a kind of laboratory of what is becoming all around Europe with the question, for example, of post-truth. La post-veritat. So, please, Mr. Tilić, you have the floor. We will have, 20 minutes of conference, and then we can open the floor to the public.
Okay. I think we are a small group of colleagues, my colleagues from academia, my colleagues from journalism, and future colleagues, probably some students. So I want to greet you all my colleagues. First of all, I want to thank the Catalan House of Journalists and the University of Lleida for inviting me to this very important symposium held at a difficult time for journalism. I also want to congratulate both the university and the Journalists Association for their cooperation, because I consider cooperation between journalists and academia is essential for a better media. And I want to congratulate once again both for organizing the third of such an important event at a time when journalism is passing through difficult times, and at a time everything is consumed and finished immediately and nothing is long-lasting. I wish that you make the 30th symposium, and I will be present in that 30th symposium as well. Why not? Human life is getting longer. So press freedom has always been an important issue since the beginning of the history of press, and it will always be. We are living in a world where journalism is not only getting more difficult, but also more dangerous. I am coming from a country, as my colleague mentioned, where journalists face difficulties and dangers. According to the records of the Committee to Protect Journalists, 13 journalists were killed around the world in the first 4 months of 2017 as they were trying to do their job. In 2016, that figure was 46, and 2 of them were from Turkey. Journalists have to be non-fighting parties of wars. Since this perception changed and they began to be embedded to the fighting party, to one of the fighting party, they are turned into easy targets in confront zones, and that is one of the reasons of increasing death tolls among journalists. Turkey is under more scrutiny because of the jailed journalists, writers, and other media employees, which is another field of growing difficulty in terms of working conditions of media workers. According to Committee to Protect Journalists data, 81 of the 296 journalists and other media employees who were jailed globally are in Turkey, and according to Turkish Journalists Associations, this number is 150, over 150. None of the officials would tell you that the journalists are imprisoned because what they had written, what they had said or broadcasted, but due to charges of terrorism, subversive act, or espionage. When a journalist is jailed, nowhere in the world officials would admit that they were jailed for journalism. I define journalism as the profession of truth-telling, the prerequisite of Truth-telling is asking questions. To tell truth and to ask questions were never welcomed in countries where democracy lacked. The less democracy and freedoms you have, the more answers you have. The more democracy and freedoms, the more questions you have. Press freedom is not a matter of giving ready answers to the people. It's a matter of asking questions to the power elite. Everyone may have answers, even the cowards. For answers, you do not need press freedom. What is difficult is to have questions, and questions have courage inside. Questions can only be asked by courageous people in difficult times, and press freedom is the fertile soil for questions to be asked by everyone. Unfortunately, Turkey has a media atmosphere which has very little room for questions. Recently, we had a referendum with which we voted a radical change in the country's political system, a change from parliamentary democracy to an administrative presidency. All through the campaign, journalists could never have the representatives of both parties together in front of them to ask questions. The majority of the television debate programs were not programs for opposite parties to be discussed, for opposite positions to be discussed, but were a kind of race between the defenders of the same position. When I was honored by the Malaga University with 2016 International Press Freedom Prize, in my speech there, I mentioned a cartoon by Spanish cartoonist El Roto. In that cartoon, two men with dark glasses were looking at a screen, and one was asking to the other to open the volume of fear because people were beginning to ask questions. Oppressive rulers count on the contagious nature of fear to make people stop asking questions. And they also use their journalists, media, to spread fear. They do not consider that courage is also contagious, and fighters of press freedom should count on the contagious nature of courage. If there are difficult and dangerous times for, if these are difficult and dangerous times for journalists, then these are the times when journalists and the press freedom most needed. Freedom is one's determination of herself or himself, not to be determined by foreign and external power. Freedom is to possess the means of realizing yourself. As Isaiah Berlin conceptualizes it, not to have obstacles, barricades, or constraints to realize yourself is negative freedom. What is more important is positive freedom, which means you have the means of realizing yourself, you have the control of your life, and everything that you may need to realize your fundamental purposes. Not to have legal restrictions to do what you want to do not mean much if you lack the means and opportunities for doing what you want to do. What do these conceptualizations mean for the free press and freedom of journalists? For a journalist, to realize herself or himself means to be able to tell the truth, to be able to ask questions. But do they have the means and opportunities for that? The answer of this question lies in the political economy of the media, especially in the ownership structure. Journalists and press freedom used to be under pressure from two main sources: states, governments on the one hand, and media owners on the other. In the 1980s, when neoliberalism was becoming dominant at economic level, media ownership structure had a radical transformation. Beginning from early 80s, traditional media owners began to leave the market and they were replaced by new media owners. This process was completed in Turkey in mid-90s and in different countries at different times, but it began with 80s. Traditional media owners, for those, usually families, whose main business was media. But new media owners were the conglomerates with main business in all sectors of the economy except the media. They were in finance, construction, mining, energy, automotive, cosmetics, shortly in all sectors of the economy, even in the war industry. Professor Ben Bagdikian, a Turkey-born Armenian-American who passed away in March last year, wrote an important book in 1983 titled Media Monopoly. The foreword of each edition of this book were especially interesting. In the first edition, in 1983, Professor Bagdikian said that the media owners controlling the US media could fill the saloon of a hotel. They were about 50. In the second edition, in 87, he said 29 media owners were controlling the US media market. In the third edition, in 90, it came down to 23. In the fourth edition, to 10. In the fifth edition, in 2000, to 6. And finally, in the last edition, which he titled as New Media Monopoly, in 2004, he said that now the media owners controlling the US media could fit into a telephone cabin, and he named them as the Big Five. The Big Five extended their activities all around the world and surrounded the 5 continents as if they had arms of an octopus. When the producers and distributors of knowledge, information, news are these conglomerates with huge interests in all sectors of the economy, and the journalists are their waged laborers, to what extent they can be telling the truth, to what extent they can realize themselves as truth tellers. These are indeed the main questions now we are asking within the journalistic community and within the academia of journalism. Amelia Arsenault and Manuel Castells, in their 2008 article, The Structure and Dynamics of Global Multimedia Business Networks, listed 7 big multimedia corporations globally controlling the media: Time Warner, Disney, Murdoch's News Corporation, Bertelsmann, NBC, CBS, and Viacom. What was interesting in that article, which owes a lot to Bagdikian's book, was the way they demonstrated how the executive board members of these media corporations were also working in executive boards of other companies. Just to give a few examples, executive board members of Time Warner, for example, the owner of CNN, were also in executive boards of Philip Morris, Tobacco Company, American Airlines, Bayer, FedEx, finance companies such as Citigroup, Gordon Brothers, US-Russia Investment Fund, Hilton Hotels, and Estee Lauder. Imagine an executive board member of a media company, we assume acting in accordance with the ethical principles of journalism and saying that sexism cannot be tolerated in media. And then the same person discusses in the executive board of Estee Lauder how they could use media and woman body to sell a lipstick. These people are employers of journalists, and these are the companies within which journalists have to realize themselves as truth tellers. Difficult. Under these difficult conditions of truth telling and realizing ourselves, could the new communication technologies offer a solution? 21st century, due to new communication technologies, internet, new media, social media, Facebook, Twitter, turned out to be a century of both challenges and opportunities. First, we welcomed internet, attributing it almost the same importance we attributed to the invention of the wheel. That technology could give us the means to realize ourselves, could free us as communicators, and most importantly, access to information would be extremely easy and cheap, so that the gap between the information rich and the information poor could be closed, or at least narrowed. Today, those hopes about narrowing the gap between the information rich and information poor through new communication technologies, through internet, totally disappeared. According to UNESCO reports, in the year 2017, internet penetration in North America is 88.1%, while it is 27.7% in Africa. Also, there is a direct relationship between the per capita income and access to internet. In countries where per capita income is less than 10,000 US dollars, such as Burkina Faso, Uganda, and Ethiopia, access to the internet is much below 20%, while in countries where per capita income is over 50,000 US dollars, Australia, Canada, Germany, USA, access to internet is much above 80%. This makes it difficult for a journalist to have positive freedom to tell the truth and to inform those who are in deep need for truth and information. Following the elections in Iran in the year 2009, thousands of young Iranians with smartphones in their hands poured into the streets of Tehran to protest what they believed to be a fraudulent election. They believed that the revolution would be defeated. The same goes for those who took the streets of Arab countries for the so-called Arab Spring, which quickly turned into an Arab Fall. The new technology, of course, was a chance and opening channels to tell the truth, but at the same time, exactly the same channels were used by paid bloggers, Twitter trolls of authoritarian regimes to attack on every critical voice. Evgeny Morozov from Belarus began as a cyber-utopian seeking to promote democracy and media reforms in the former Soviet bloc with the help of internet. He said, blogs, social networks, wikis, we had an arsenal of weapons that seemed far more potent than police batons, surveillance cameras, and handcuffs. He believed this, but he ended up in USA as a professor writing the book, The Dark Side of Internet Freedom, The Net Delusion. He concluded neither internet nor its independent blogs were a platform of freedom in their own. They were not free of the intervention of political elites and corporations. Technology may easily be blamed for the massive job cuts of the last decades in media. In old days, a TV team going out for a story consisted of 4 people: a reporter, a cameraman, a light and a sound technician. With the new small digital cameras, now one does the job of the 4. This new technology, combined with the new media ownership, which meant a media owner owning several media, television channels, radios, websites, newspapers, magazines, meant one journalist doing the job of more than 10. The result was massive job cuts in the last decades, and strangely enough, we had a boom of communication faculties in all countries, graduating every year many students for a sector which is already pushing out its experienced journalists. That led to an extraordinary feeling of insecurity among journalists. And journalists, feeling so much insecure, are much less free to say the truth, to ask questions. Imagine, some years ago, there was a story in La Stampa of Italy about a group of scientists working on artificial intelligence in USA. They produced a journalist robot which could perfectly write baseball stories. And they were expecting this journalist report to write excellent basketball stories soon. That story raised the question among journalists, if journalism could turn out to be a profession to be done without journalists. Imagine the feeling of insecurity this question carries in itself. Under such severe conditions of insecurity, journalists became much more open to pressures, much more fragile and fearful. Editorial independence turned out to be an old-fashioned concept. There was a saying, the history of journalism is the history of honorable resignations. We had editors who resigned in the past, rejecting the pressure imposed on them. Now we have much less, if there are any. At least in my country, in the last 2-3 decades, during the times media were experiencing maximum pressure from both political power and ownership, there were almost no resignations. If the danger would only be the disappearance of a profession, that would only be the tragedy of us, of journalists, and just for one generation. There are several professions which disappeared in history. However, When journalism is the case, the tragedy is not only the tragedy of journalists, of a group of professionals. It is assumed that democracies can only be possible with a well-informed and critical citizenry. And the only guarantee for that is journalism, a free and truth-telling journalism. If journalists are not free and cannot realize themselves as truth-tellers, we should worry not only about our profession, but also about our democracies. I know that I draw a very pessimistic picture with reference to technology. I am not alone in doing so. James Gordon Bennett, the editor of New York Herald, has said, "Change is in the air. A new communication technology threatens a dramatic upheaval in America's newspaper industry, overturning the status quo and disrupting the business model that has served the industry for years. This great revolution will mean that some publications must submit to destiny and go out of existence." When I read this quote to my students and ask what that new technology might be, they immediately respond saying internet. This very pessimistic statement of Bennett makes me indeed optimist, because it was not made with reference to internet, as most of my students think, but it was in fact made in May 1845, when the revolutionary technology of the day was the electric telegraph. Journalism and newspaper industry survived over 170 years since then. Why not another 170 or many more years after internet? Technology in itself is neither revolutionary nor counter-revolutionary. It means something with the ideology behind it and with the way we use it. Thus, it is not the place where we should focus for press freedom. The threat is coming from interest-blinded new media ownership, from their embeddedness with the states and governments, and from the oppression of anti-democratic powers. I know, again, that I draw a quite pessimistic picture about press freedom. Yes, theoretically, the picture is very pessimist. But I believe that the more we are pessimist in theory, the more we have to be optimist in practice. Media and journalism are an area of struggle, a struggle for free press, for telling the truth, and for asking questions. The way that goes to democracy is in that struggle. I know that those journalists who are ready to pay the price are always free. I know that under these difficult times, courage is needed to ask questions and to defend press freedom. Those who attack press freedom do all to secure journalists, knowing fear is contagious, but courage is contagious as well. Press freedom needs journalists to be optimistic and courageous in practice. Press freedom needs journalists to be organized and be in solidarity, both nationally and internationally. A woman syndicalist of my country has once said, "If I had a life as long as a butterfly, I would spend it in organizations." To assure press freedom for themselves, I believe we journalists have to follow this motto too. Thank you.
Well, we can open the floor if there is any questions. I have one question just to start the debate. I don't know if there is any questions here. We can translate from Catalan to English, so don't worry about it. The question of that Reporters Sans Frontières considers Turkey one of the most important jails for journalists in the world in the last report made available. You said there is 150 journalists in jail. Well, the question is, what are their feelings? I mean, if you are in contact with them, and why keep, fighting when you know that the risk is being jailed? So what's the strategy? I don't know, the courage that you said at the end that still keep people fighting in that moment.
So the question is, what is the feeling of the journalists in jail? I
The
can
first
answer.
one, and the second one is how
Yeah.
to keep fighting.
I can answer this as an experienced prisoner because I myself was in jail for 3.5 years during the military regime in 1980. The problem is until you are in jail. When you are in jail, the problem is over. You feel better and you feel relaxed. So I know the colleagues who are in jail, they are strong. They know why they are in jail. The problem is always with the family, with the close people, with their beloved people who are outside. And why to continue fighting? One of our great poets, indeed one of the great poets of the world, Nazım Hikmet, in one of his poems asks, why a rabbit run? Why a rabbit escape? Does the rabbit escape because he or she fears, or he or she runs? Oh, it's difficult to translate this because he runs, that's why the rabbit fears. Could it be understood? Are you running because you are escape, or you are escape because you are running?
Okay.
I believe is the second way. If you begin to escape, you are always in fear. So this is the guarantee of one's own psychological health. You should stop fearing and you should stop escaping if you want to keep your mental health.
Okay. Is there any question? Here, okay.
Well, first, Dogan, thank you very much for being here with us. You make happy all us, I think. Yeah? One question. In the last part of your conference, you have speak about an alliance, journalists and media. Which are the points of this alliance, do you think, in with the crisis and with the economic problems? What kind of points we can alliance with the media, journalists and media?
Mm-hmm. Well, the title of this conference is the, I think, main focus of a possible alliance. No matter where in the world, when it becomes difficult or impossible to express yourself freely, we have to be in solidarity with them. And indeed, before coming to that point, we all have to be organized within our countries. We all have to come together. Unfortunately, there is a global tendency of escaping from organizations, not only in journalism, but in all sectors of work. Workers are less in unions, journalists are less in unions or in associations. There is such a tendency, and we have to try to turn it the other way round, because the pressure on journalists, both economically and politically, is so strong, so strong. There is a terrible problem of insecurity. Many journalists, almost every journalist, is in fear that the next day he or she may lose the job. And in some countries, as it is in Turkey, they are facing the risk of being jailed. So under these conditions, the only way we can resist is to be together, to be in solidarity at national and at international level. There is no other way. We have to get to know each other. We have to talk to each other. And that is the first step of being in solidarity. That is the first step of getting internationally organized.
More questions? The question of the situation, you said, is worsening, the situation in Turkey for the freedom of press. I don't know the horizon, maybe in 5-10 years. I mean, what will be the landscape of Turkish press if the situation is worsening and Erdogan, for example, just won the last referendum some weeks ago, etc. So what will be the situation in the future?
These questions, what will be the situation in the future? I was doing TV programs, and I was asked these kind of questions. And I was giving very intelligent answers, speaking a lot, that in future it will be like this, it will be like that. And when the program was over, my relatives, my close friends, were asking me similar questions. I was telling them, I don't know. They were saying, come on, you were talking on TV, very intelligent, very clever. And I was telling them, they are paying me and I am speaking. Now I am talking to friends. How can I say things I don't know? So here we are friends. I don't know what may happen in 10 years, in 15 years. But I know one thing, and that is there will be people who will resist to all kinds of pressures. I know one thing, there will be people who will never give up. I know one thing, there will be people who will insist in asking questions. I know one thing, the truth will always find a channel to go through. And I know another thing about myself, I will be always in that side.
And the question of censorship is very interesting in your country because there is a lot of censorship on internet, on Facebook, on Twitter. You said also something about it in your conference. I mean, is really that censorship effective at the end for the government, for the authorities?
I don't think so. This new technology, new media, which as an old journalist I am not very familiar with, is something that you can never stop on the one hand within your national boundaries. And you may block access to, I don't know, Facebook, Twitter, but usually the youngsters, they find a way through another channel, they go, and the users of that new technology, they find the ways of accessing to that information. So I don't know what is the logic of making that kind of bans and restrictions, except making you, as the government, to lose your face. So at the end, I don't think that it is effective. I don't think that they get something really by putting those kind of restrictions on that on such channels.
What can we do? I mean, what do you expect from European people? We have here some journalists, some students, also we have the mayor of Lleida. I don't know, what can really we do? What do you expect European people could do for the freedom of press in Turkey?
I think I gave the answer to this question. We should be in touch. We should talk to each other. We should be in solidarity. And whenever any of us is in difficulty of expressing himself or herself, we have to open a channel for those people to express themselves. This, for every country, this is a problematic thing, the support from outside. Because it also, if it is done in an improper way, it raises nationalism within the country. So why you are interested that much in the problems of my country? Many ordinary people with such a feeling would side with the oppressors, with the governments. But there are certain issues which has no boundaries, such as democracy, such as freedom of expression. These are values of humanity. These are human rights. These values do not have nationality, do not have borders. So in defense of such things, first as journalists and professionals, or as members of academia, as members of civil society, we should always be together. And this is done. I am not talking about the governments to governments relationship, but I am talking about a relationship from citizen to citizen, from professional to professional. You cannot say that there is some problem at that level. As also you mentioned, I am a member of almost every journalist association in my country, but I am also member either at executive level or as simple member at international level of all journalist associations. I am an honorary vice president of Association of European Journalists. I am active in IFJ, International Federation of Journalists. So we have international channels of supporting each other, of being in solidarity. We have to find the proper language. We have to find the proper way of doing this, not to agitate the nationalist feelings within a country while being in solidarity with the victims of oppression in those countries.
Let me finish with a question of a personal question. You wrote a book, I mean, many years ago, with a title like I'm ashamed.
But I am a journalist.
But I am a journalist. But why are you ashamed? I mean, can you explain, can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes. I am ashamed, but I am a journalist was a product of more than 10 years research. It was indeed my PhD thesis. It is published, it is translated into Greek, into German, and soon I think the University of Malaga is working on it. It will be translated into Spanish. For that book, I interviewed more than 150 journalists from Turkey and from Greece. It was indeed a comparison of Turkish and Greek journalism. And when I was listening my recordings of those journalists, I realized that somewhere almost all those 150 journalists said, I am ashamed, I am ashamed, I am ashamed. Then I thought this should be the title of the book. And there were really many warnings from the colleagues. They said, don't put such a name because you will irritate the journalists. They will never talk about your book, etc. But to be honest, the title was given by the people I interviewed. Why I choose that? First of all, the feeling of shame is the most human feeling. Many animals could have courage, fear, but the feeling of shame is the most human feeling, and the feeling of shame is the most promising, is the most optimistic feeling. If you are ashamed of something you have done, then that means there's a great hope of correcting that behavior. So when I wrote that book, I was much more optimistic about journalism because almost every journalist was somehow ashamed of what he or she did. I don't know if I repeat the same research today, if I could see that many ashamed journalism. So the feeling of shame is not something to be ashamed. The feeling of shame is something to be proud of. It's good if one can be shamed. So that title was indeed carrying inside an optimism for the future of journalism. If we are ashamed, we may correct ourselves. Worry if that feeling of shame is gone.
Well, you just talk about the question of pessimism when we talk about the question of freedom of expression. Internet as the invention of the wheel, as you said, and then about censorship, but we are on the optimistic side. So keep fighting and good luck for the future. And thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.